شكرا يا ربي شكرا هديت قلبي شكرا نورت دربي شكرا شكرا يا رب شكرا يا ربي شكرا
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له الله أكبر كبيرا والحمد لله كثيرا لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العزيز الحكيم. Esteemed hosts and dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is truly an honor to be here with you today at such a conference to host the likes of the sheikhs and imams we saw earlier discussing the future of our ummah and in relation to the life here in Canada. Mashallah, I took some great thoughts away from that about how we as Muslims must be more openly honest with our leaders whilst not tearing each other apart behind each other's backs. How we must seek unity but not thoughtlessness. We must have a point to joining together. And I thank the Imams and Sheikh Yasser for this and all the other speakers for the knowledge that they've given. Before I begin, I should say that I am certainly not, a person of any great knowledge. I am a mother, I am a writer. Oh, my husband would say, hang on a minute, Islamically I'm a wife and a mother. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a writer. And over all of these, alhamdulillah, I am one who submits to the will of Allah. And I cannot begin to express my gratitude that I know how to live in this dunya. So I've been Muslim now, alhamdulillah, for 4 years, and that's long enough to know how enjoyable it is hearing revert stories. And I hope, inshallah, today, that with sharing my own small story, that we will take away from it some points about dawah, how the actions of others impacted on me when I was in a very different frame of mind and wasn't looking for religion or faith. How did those people, with Allah's will, touch my heart? And how can we then act on those skills as well with those around us, inshallah? So I want to go back to the beginning. My parents in the 1960s were both in the entertainment industry. My mother was a model and my father was a well-known actor. They were two of what you could call the beautiful people. But behind that beautiful exterior was a rather shoddy backstory that involved a lot of alcohol and a lot of drugs. Now, as a little girl of 5, I remember praying every night. In fact, my mum said to me just a few days ago, I was speaking with the family and we were wondering why you're such an extremist now. I said, oh, that's nice. What was the conclusion? Well, I brought it back to you always being a strange little girl who used to pray. She's partly right. I'm not an extremist, inshallah, but I did used to pray. And I remember being 5 years old and my grandmother taught me the Lord's Prayer. Now, the Lord's Prayer is a Christian prayer. It's actually made by Isa alayhi salam, as he submitted to the will of Allah before his disciples. And the way that Isa alayhi salam prayed is a way that Muslims can actually still pray. Did you know that? I'm sure you know that, because in Egypt just 2 years ago, when the Christians made that dua, so did the Muslims. They joined them as they tried to overthrow a dictator. So I used to make that prayer and then follow it with an appeal to the one God who ruled over everything. Because in a child's mind, faith is very simple. There's no buy one, get one free God. There's no buy one, get three free God. There's just ahad, just one. So I knew that in my life, my mother made a lot of decisions, my dad made a few. My grandfather made a few decisions, my grandmother made the most decisions. We were a matriarchal family. But above them all, who was running the outside world? Who was making the leaves grow on the trees? That wasn't my grandmother. Who was making the stars shine at night? Who was making the sun rise in the morning? That was the one God. And I used to pray so hard that I even remember one of my prayers. And it was this: Dear God, please take my younger sister away. She's really horrible, but Allah is merciful, and she's with us today, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. But I knew who to appeal to, and that carried me through my whole childhood. That absolute knowledge, that certainty that God was out there. And then come the teenage years, and they are a danger zone in every community, in every time. In fact, one of the great Greek philosophers once wrote a letter describing the state of teenagers in his time, and he described it something like this: the children don't listen to their parents, they're rude to their teachers, they have no respect for society. Truly, we are a nation in trouble. This was thousands of years ago. So my teenage years came, and with it, two things happened. First, the ego comes in. You become one of those youngsters. We all go through this, by the way. Who knows everything about everything? Who's got teenage children here? Right. Have you ever heard this phrase, what do you know about anything? My grandfather fought in the Second World War, in five of the invasions of the Second World War. And I used to stand toe-to-toe to him when I was 15 going, what do you know about life? I think he knew quite a bit in hindsight. So the nafs come in, the ego comes in, and with that comes another catastrophe. Potentially the hormones come in. What a mess we get ourselves into. But if you add into my teenage years the fact that my friend's mum was giving us drugs, got kind of a toxic mix. I tried to hold on to my prayer, I did. But one night a friend from school, she came over to stay at my house, and as we were going to sleep, I put my hands together and started to pray. Dear God, please bless Mummy and Daddy, dear God. My friend started to snigger. That sound that only teenage girls make. What are you doing? She said. I said, I'm praying. She said, who are you praying to? The big man on the cloud with a beard, Santa Claus? Children are very practical. I tried to have an image of my head of what God looked like. If he was a man like my dad made mistakes. Did that mean God, the Father, could make mistakes? And actually, if God was on a cloud, why couldn't I see him on a rainy day? My faith began to melt away. How hard it is to hold on to that rope of Iman, the rope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us ties us, that belief ties us to him and to safety. My hands started to slide off. And I was smoking drugs on the way to school proudly at 14. And then with my ego, I decided that I was clever enough to pass exams. And wasn't I brilliant because I was just about pretty enough to turn a few heads? And how arrogant I became. May Allah forgive me. So, after that, I became a journalist and I started to write. And I became what we might call a minor celebrity. And I want us all to think about this world of celebrity that we now live in. And even as Muslims, our tendency to clap, which I know helps the speaker, because sometimes coming to a hall where everybody sits there silent, I know when I wasn't a Muslim, I was thinking, wow, this is a tough crowd. Nobody's clapping anything. But actually, you know what? When you clap, it damages us. It makes us think we're different from you. The correct way, we know, is to make takbir and to praise Allah. So please help all of us speakers here not to go back to ways that damage our own track with Allah, inshallah. But I used to love the applause. That's why I can talk about it. I trained as an actress, and I was an actress for 7 years. And if you speak to any actor and say, why do you do a job that makes you mostly poor, into all kinds of situations, why do you put up with it? They will say, the applause. It's addictive. It's like a drug. When you're in that state, you want it. You want the fame. And people will give it to you. And I had a little bit of it. And it became quite toxic. I was a minor celebrity who, in my world, thought I was the major celebrity in the universe, because everybody became a little star in my orbit of ego. My husband at the time, my kids, my parents, everything revolved around my nafs. So, as a Muslim, I know the moments that I want to ask other people about. And one of them is, okay, what's the moment when the light got in? When did you first feel that the universe was about something different? When did that happen? And I've thought about this long and hard. And it comes down to this moment for me. In 2000, I had my first daughter. Her name is Alexandra. And you know, the birth of a first child, for both parents, but I promise you especially for the mother, is a moment of transcendence. You leave your body, your heart bursts with a love you didn't even know was there when you first look into those eyes. And more than that, you want the world to be a better place. I went instantly overnight from someone who used to listen to Eminem and rap stars to someone who didn't like loud music too much. Well, not that kind of music, because I didn't want women to be abused. I didn't want that kind of language around my daughter. In the year 2000, in December, my daughter was a month old, and I was holding her to me, and I was watching the evening news, and a photograph came on that would change my life. And it was this photograph. There is a young boy. He looks 10 years old, but actually he's 14. He's small for his age. And all you can see is the back of him, because the cameraman is behind him. And the little boy is standing like this. And what is amazing is that he's about to throw something. It's a dynamic photograph. But what is more amazing, brothers and sisters, is that just a few meters away, gigantic, bearing down on him, is a tank. Now, if you and I were here, I didn't tell you he had a stone in his right hand, did I? If you and I, may Allah protect us, ever came face to face from a tank, my bet is we'd run. That's the human instinct. But this little boy, he was leaning into the tank. He was going to throw his stone without fear, no matter what happened to him. And I knew, sitting there with my new baby, I knew the men in that tank were afraid of him, and he was not afraid of that tank. The newscaster told me the boy's name was Faris O'Day, and he came from a place called Rafah refugee camp that I'd never heard of. And I want you to remember that name, because it comes up later in my story. And I didn't know it at the time. But 9 days after that photo, Faris O'Day was shot dead by an Israeli sniper. You see, he was Palestinian. The bullet went into his throat and he bled to death on the floor of his refugee camp, protecting the women of his village, the stone. Now that photo and the qadr of Allah is the only explanation I have for everything that has happened since, even leading up to right being here today. Because I have been aware that I have not been guiding my ship for a very long time. And we all have moments where we think we're in charge, right? And it's good to have a plan. We're encouraged to have aspirations. But what if you let go of the steering wheel of your life? Who's actually guiding you?
पैसा दो ना